It was an act of violence so profound it defied comprehension. The victim, a 10-year-old child. A wave of dread swept through the community, a silent, urgent message passing between parents. Watch your children. April 24th, 2022, 9 p.m. In Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin, the night was just beginning. A father's hand shook as he dialed 911. His daughter, 10-year-old Lily, was missing. The trip was only 400 meters, a short bicycle ride from her aunt's house. It was a journey that should have taken 3 minutes at most. 4 hours had now vanished. 12 hours later, her body would be discovered in the park's dense overgrowth, beaten, strangled, and violated. The brutality of the crime scene was enough to unnerve even the most seasoned investigators. Yet, from the very beginning, something felt profoundly wrong. A disturbing paradox emerged. The sheer ferocity of the assault was at odds with the amateurish, almost clumsy, execution of the killing itself. The attacker's actions seemed chaotic, driven by a desperate, uncontrolled rage. Clues were scattered across the scene with a shocking lack of care. Fingerprints, clothing fibers, and biological evidence. This was not the calculated work of a veteran predator. It pointed to something else entirely, something more bizarre and, in its own way, more terrifying. As detectives began to assemble the puzzle from the fragments of evidence, they understood the case would leave an indelible scar on their careers, just as the chilling truth began to settle over the town like a shroud. The killer was a child, a boy who, the following day, would offer condolences to her grieving parents, a smile on his face. But the discovery was not an end. It was the start of a far more complex ordeal. While the family was left to navigate an impossible grief and the seeming impossibility of justice, a new battle was just beginning in the courtrooms. A series of appeals commenced as the legal system wrestled with the constitutional rights of the accused. In November of 2026, the world awaits a final verdict. But for Lily, all time ceased on April 24th, 2022. She was just 10 years old. This story is a painful but vital examination of how evil can hide in plain sight. It is a reminder that awareness and vigilance are the last lines of defense for the vulnerable. The case serves as a stark illustration of a community's readiness, or failure, to protect its children. It forces a difficult question. How do we recognize profound danger when it wears the mask of absolute normality? It is a lesson that could one day save a child. In the small American town of Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin, on November 4th, 2011, a girl named Lily Peters was born. Following her parents' divorce early in her life, Lily made her home with her father. Her mother, however, remained a constant and active presence, ensuring she was deeply involved in her daughter's life and upbringing. Lily was a bright, cheerful, and energetic child, typical of any girl her age. She found joy in playing outdoors, spending time with her friends, and, most of all, riding her bicycle. Chippewa Falls projected the comforting illusion of a small, safe town. Trusting in that security, Lily's father occasionally permitted her to ride her bike independently through the familiar neighborhood streets. Her usual destination was her aunt's house, located just a few hundred meters away. On April 24th, 2022, Lily set out on that familiar ride. After securing her father's permission, the 10-year-old left her home at approximately 3 o'clock in the afternoon. As hours ticked by with no sign of Lily's return, a knot of unease began to tighten in her father's stomach. He placed a call to his sister, who confirmed his fears. Lily had left her house nearly an hour before. The father knew instantly that something was terribly wrong. His sister's home was just a stone's throw away. A trip that should have taken only minutes, and his instructions had been clear: come straight home. Gripped by a terrifying premonition, he began frantically calling the parents of Lily's friends. He hoped she had simply been distracted, stopping to play at a friend's house. But no one had seen her. His calls then widened to a network of relatives and friends, his voice pleading with them to help him search for his daughter. Together, the small group fanned out across the neighborhood, methodically checking every street and yard as daylight faded into a dark, anxious evening. But their efforts to find the girl were futile. At around 9 o'clock that night, with hope dwindling, her father made the call to the police. Law enforcement officers immediately mobilized, their search efforts bolstered by numerous volunteers from the local community. The father, desperate, urged them to issue an Amber Alert, the emergency broadcast system designed for missing children. This system rapidly distributes information about an abducted minor across a designated territory, turning the public into a force of lookouts. but his request was denied by the officers on scene. They explained that Lily's case did not currently meet the strict criteria required to trigger the alert. For the system to be activated, protocol demanded credible evidence that the child was in imminent danger. The father was incensed by the refusal, but his arguments were powerless against procedure. The search for Lily Peters pressed on through the night. The parents clung to the desperate hope that Lily would be found, and soon, but in the cold hours of the early morning, their deepest fear was about to be realized. Authorities made a discovery. Lily's bicycle, deliberately concealed within the dense undergrowth of a small park adjacent to a footpath. The implication of the find was immediate and grim, leaving little room for any conclusion other than the worst. It was clear the girl had met with foul play. The location of the bicycle was a profound puzzle for investigators. Lily's usual route to her aunt's house was along the sidewalk of a heavily trafficked road, not the park trail. While that trail was a significant shortcut, it was also notoriously secluded, winding through thickets of trees and brush, far from public view. The question that haunted investigators was simple. Why had she chosen this desolate path? No one had an answer, but one thing had become chillingly obvious. It was somewhere along this gloomy, isolated trail that Lily's journey had ended. With a clear geographic focus for their search, law enforcement mobilized every available resource. Canine units were immediately dispatched to the scene to track any potential scent. Drones equipped with cameras scanned the terrain from above as the number of officers on the ground swelled. A painstaking canvass of the surrounding neighborhood began, with detectives knocking on every door, searching for any fragment of suspicious activity. But as the hours bled away, every exhaustive effort yielded nothing. It was as if Lily had simply vanished from the face of the earth. Police and civilian volunteers worked relentlessly through the night, meticulously combing every inch of the park and its periphery. It wasn't until around 9 o'clock in the morning that a discovery was made, one so horrific it sent a shockwave through the entire search party. There, in the same park, only a few dozen meters from where her bicycle had been stashed, they found her. Her lifeless body lay deep within a thicket, obscured by a covering of fallen leaves and branches. The concealment was so effective that she would have been difficult to spot even in broad daylight, let alone in the consuming darkness of the previous night. To the seasoned investigators on site, the truth was undeniable. This was not an accident. It was a homicide, and the scene had been staged. The final, official conclusion, however, would have to wait for the forensic experts. In the meantime, the police department's mission shifted with a terrifying urgency to find the predator who had done this, before another child in their town became a target. Patrols were immediately intensified, and a constant police presence was established at the elementary school where Lily had been a student. An urgent directive went out from the school administration to all parents, imploring them not to leave their children unattended for a single moment and to escort them everywhere. In a small town where such violent crimes were almost unheard of, news of the child's brutal murder spread like a contagion. A palpable horror took hold of the residents. Everyone was gripped by the sickening understanding that somewhere, very close, a monster was hiding in plain sight, and authorities had no clear picture of who they were hunting. Throughout the following day, the police department was inundated with calls and messages from a terrified citizenry. People reported any detail, any circumstance that now seemed sinister or out of place. Simultaneously, detectives began a systematic review of every individual in the area who had a criminal record, paying special attention to anyone with a history of offenses against children. The atmosphere in Chippewa Falls was charged with an almost unbearable mixture of fear and suspicion. Parents were paralyzed by anxiety, afraid to let their children out of their sight for even a second. Against this backdrop of public terror, the police maintained a stoic silence, offering no comment on the investigation's progress. Into this official vacuum, the most disturbing rumors began to fester. Some people claimed they had seen Lily fall from her bicycle into the river. Others spoke with certainty that she had been killed by a transient, or worse, by one of their own neighbors. Each new theory was more dreadful than the last. These stories, whispered from one person to the next, only poisoned the atmosphere further. The community demanded answers from law enforcement, an end to the agonizing uncertainty. Then, on April 26th, police units, armed with a search warrant, descended upon the home of Lily's aunt. They cordoned off the building, a move that sent a new shockwave of confusion and alarm through the local residents. What could this possibly mean? Was it conceivable that a member of the girl's own family was now a suspect? As questions swirled, officials remained tight-lipped. The community waited on edge for the entire day. Finally, late in the evening, Police Chief Matthew Kelm stepped before the cameras to make an official statement that would stun everyone. A suspect, he announced, had been arrested in connection with the brutal murder of Lily Peters. Any sense of collective relief, however, was immediately extinguished. The police refused to release the detainee's identity, citing the individual's young age and laws protecting the personal data of minors. But in a town so small, where everyone is connected and events are scrutinized, such a secret could not be contained for long. Very soon, the shocking truth began to surface, spreading like a whisper through the heartbroken community. The main suspect in this monstrous crime was revealed to be none other than Lily's own cousin, 14-year-old Carson Peters-Burger, her aunt's son. The revelation was an unimaginable twist that left everyone who had followed the case completely stunned. But when investigators later disclosed the details that led them to the arrest, the public was dealt an even greater blow. The trail that led them to Carson had not come from a traditional witness, but from an anonymous tip, posted by a stranger on the Reddit forum. An online comment provided the first lead. A user recalled seeing a girl with a bicycle, looking much like Lily, in the park on that fateful day. She was accompanied, he wrote, by a boy who appeared to be slightly older. When the story of the murder hit the news, the user's mind immediately went back to that young man, a chilling suspicion taking hold. Another person saw the post, recognized its potential gravity, and relayed the information to the police. Almost simultaneously, a second, far more disturbing tip reached the detectives. This one from Carson's own grandmother. She reported a horrifying family secret. Carson had confessed to his younger sister that he was the one who had killed Lily. More chillingly, he had relayed the story with a smile on his face, as if it were a triumphant accomplishment. Investigators immediately descended on the boy's home for an interrogation, during which the young suspect abruptly confessed to everything. His account began on that final evening. Carson had convinced Lily to join him on a walk in the park, using the pretense of studying the local plant life. Once they were deep within the woods, far from any potential witnesses, he struck Lily in the stomach, grabbed a heavy branch, and beat her over the head 3 times. When the girl collapsed to the forest floor, Carson fell upon her, strangling her with his own hands. After, in a bizarre and final act of violation, he bit the young girl on her body, leaving a distinct impression of his teeth before fleeing the scene and racing home. There, he methodically showered and scrubbed his clothing, attempting to wash away every physical trace of the crime he had just committed. Hours later, as the neighborhood erupted into a frantic search for the missing child, Carson slipped out of his house unnoticed and made his way back to the park. He returned to the exact location of the killing, where he concealed his little sister's brutalized body under a makeshift covering of fallen leaves and branches. The killer would later provide investigators with a truly chilling detail. His plan had been fully formed before he and Lily even left the house that day. This was not a crime of passion, but a deliberate and meticulously planned atrocity. There was no question about the validity of Carson's confession. He provided investigators with information that only the killer could have known, facts withheld from the public and even from the girl's father. He described, for example, the specific state of the victim's clothing and the characteristic bite mark he had left on her body. In the end, a full forensic examination completely corroborated the teenager's chilling testimony. The autopsy confirmed that Lily had died from multiple blows to the head and strangulation. Evidence of sexual assault was also discovered on her body, and DNA analysis of the biological material pointed unequivocally to Carson. The collected physical evidence was more than substantial enough to formally charge the 14-year-old boy with premeditated murder. Despite the suspect's young age, the decision was made almost immediately to try him as an adult. This was based on several factors: the extraordinary cruelty and cynicism of the act itself, the clear evidence of careful planning, and the extreme vulnerability of his victim. Immediately following the arrest, a preliminary hearing was held where a judge set Carson's bail at $1 million. The boy's family, of course, possessed no such sum of money, ensuring he would remain behind bars to await a full trial. Carson's grandmother attempted to petition the courts, arguing for her grandson's case to be transferred to the juvenile system. In her appeal to the judge, the woman insisted that her grandson was a good and kind boy who had simply made a terrible mistake, but all these attempts proved futile. Meanwhile, Lily's family was enduring an unimaginable hell. They had not only lost their beloved daughter in the most tragic way possible, but her killer was revealed to be their own young relative. This was the same boy who, only days before, had pretended to mourn with them at the memorial service, hugging and consoling his grief-stricken family members. The same boy who later, with a smile, would boast to his younger sister about his vile crime, and then describe it to police in all its horrifying detail. It is nearly impossible to conceive of the psychological torment they must have felt in that moment. Journalists covering the high-profile case soon unearthed a trove of interesting facts about Carson Berger's family background. It was revealed that after his parents had divorced, the boy had been living with his mother and her partner, while his biological father, Adam Berger, once a very close presence in his son's life, lived in another city. In 2016, Adam had been arrested for possession of illegal substances and obscene. A search of his person and property uncovered a chilling collection: 10 explicit photographs, each accompanied by meticulous notes that served as a manifesto for his deviant fantasies and intentions. The justice system responded in 2018 with a 3-year prison sentence. Upon his release, he made the deliberate choice to reside in unsettling proximity to his son. According to those who knew him, the arrest was a psychic schism for Carson, an event that irrevocably altered his personality. The benevolent, bright-eyed boy they remembered was gone, replaced by a sullen, isolated figure consumed by a quiet rage and a profound bitterness. The primary target for this corrosive anger was his own mother, whom he cast as the sole villain in the narrative of his father's removal. In the boy's fractured worldview, her decision to divorce his father was the singular act that had detonated his world, erasing any possibility of a happy family. While incarcerated, Adam attempted to secure visitation with his son, petitioning for sessions without the legally mandated supervision of the boy's mother. His request was denied, a decision heavily influenced by the mother's categorical opposition, which only served to intensify Carson's deep-seated resentment toward her. Despite the prison walls, Adam discovered a way to bridge the distance, exchanging electronic messages with his son nearly every day from a prison computer. And during the teenager's stays with his grandmother, she permitted him to spend hours on the phone speaking with his father. She would later recount that during these conversations, Carson seemed to come alive, once again showing glimpses of the happy child he had been before the trauma. As for Carson's mother, journalists soon unearthed the fact that she was no stranger to legal troubles herself. The woman had previously been held accountable for possessing prohibited substances and for an assault on a former partner. Following her divorce from Carson's father, she began a relationship with John Repetto, a man whose past was marked by a criminal conviction for fraud. An examination of the stepfather's social media accounts revealed a deeply disturbing digital footprint. His profiles were littered with posts glorifying serial killers, bizarre memes involving small children, and even overt threats to inflict physical harm on others. It is difficult to comprehend the environment this grim individual and the boy's troubled mother created for an already profoundly damaged child. Several months after the arrest, as the defense was mounting its case for trial, the proceedings took another bizarre turn. At a court hearing, Carson's attorneys announced that a video had emerged on YouTube which they claimed contained sealed investigative materials. The allegedly leaked information included recordings of phone conversations, confidential police documents, and even video footage from the crime scene itself. According to the defense, this breach was not only illegal, but could critically compromise an objective hearing of the case. Their concern was amplified by the fact that the sensational video had already accumulated nearly 1 million views. The situation grew even more peculiar. Carson's own lawyer admitted that he had no access to some of the documents featured in the video and professed to have no idea who could have edited and released it online. From a legal standpoint, a leak of that magnitude could have a devastating impact on the prosecution's case, potentially leading to the dismissal of some charges. Consequently, the judge took the matter very seriously and initiated a comprehensive investigation. The outcome of that investigation, however, was startling for an entirely different reason. It was discovered that the video was not a leak of sealed evidence, but an ordinary true crime segment compiled by an amateur using news clippings and other publicly available materials. It revealed no state secrets. Following this thorough review, the judge closed his inquiry, and the defense attorney quietly withdrew his complaint. Still, the strange episode left many observers wondering if Carson's defense team was engaging in tactics designed to delay or obstruct the legal process. A further, more practical question also began to circulate. How was the boy's family affording such an advanced and aggressive lawyer? A review of their documented family budget showed that such an expense should have been impossible. It was a financial anomaly that has never been explained. In August of 2023, over a year after the horrific event, a decisive hearing was scheduled to take place. This hearing would determine the crucial question of whether Carson would be tried as an adult or if his case would be relegated to juvenile court. Carson attended only remotely, appearing via video link from the detention center. The law strictly prohibited broadcasting the defendant's face, so journalists could only film the blank screen, a disembodied presence identified in court filings as CTPB and referred to by the court-appointed pseudonym Christopher. The weight of the judge's impending decision was enormous. A transfer to the juvenile system would almost certainly mean Christopher would not be imprisoned for long. Those courts seldom impose significant custodial sentences, prioritizing instead the education, treatment, and rehabilitation of young offenders. He would likely be released after just a few years, at most. But 2 of the 3 charges leveled against Christopher, first-degree intentional homicide and first-degree sexual assault of a child under the age of 13, are classified as Class A felonies. In the state of Wisconsin, the penalty for a Class A felony is life imprisonment. If Christopher were to be tried as an adult, he faced the rest of his natural life behind bars. This was the sentence Lily's parents insisted upon, a demand for which it is impossible to fault them. The law, in its most basic function, is meant to protect society from such dangerous individuals. A teenager who could meticulously plan the brutal murder of a small child and then cynically boast of his actions is, by any definition, a threat to everyone. Many believe his place is in a cell, not back in society after a few years of state-sponsored rehabilitation. This was the prevailing opinion of a concerned public that followed every development in the high-profile case. In September of 2024, the Wisconsin Court of Appeals rendered its decision. The boy, known by the pseudonym Christopher, charged in the death of Lily Peters, would stand trial in adult court. The court concluded that the defense had failed to demonstrate how moving the case to the juvenile system would not devalue the seriousness of the crime. In March of 2025, the defense filed its next motion, a request for a change of venue. The defense argued that the relentless media attention had saturated Chippewa County, making a fair trial there an impossibility. Public displays of grief, including memorials erected near the courthouse, and a tidal wave of online support for the Peters family, were presented as evidence of a biased local jury pool. On August 27, 2025, Judge Stephen Gibbs acknowledged the challenge, granting part of the motion. The jury would be sourced from outside the county's borders. The trial was scheduled for November 2, 2026. By then, more than 3 years will have elapsed since the night that shattered a community. For Lily's parents, the agony is a permanent fixture of their existence. Their loss was compounded. It wasn't just their daughter who was taken, but also their nephew, a boy they had embraced as their own. It was a dual betrayal, leaving a wound that could never truly heal. The town of Chippewa Falls remains caught in the shadow of the event, a place where the fabric of trust was irrevocably torn. Parents now hesitate, their fear a constant presence when their children venture outside alone. In a gesture of communal grief, local mothers, many of whom never knew Lily, organized fundraisers to place purple benches etched with her name in the spaces that once brought her joy: her church, the local ice cream parlor, and her gymnastics studio. The color was a small tribute to the girl who loved it most. While the courts are set to render a verdict in November of 2026, for Lily Peters, time will forever be frozen on April 24, 2022. Lily Peters was 10 years old, a bright spirit known for her love of bike rides and the simple joy of playing with her friends. She was meant to experience a full life, high school graduation, the discovery of love, the chance to simply be. Instead, her future was extinguished in the dense woods of a park, a place just moments from the safety of her own home. Her memory now serves as a chilling testament to the fragility of life and a stark warning about the predators who can hide behind the most trusted faces. The case of the little girl they called Angel Lily remains a haunting chapter for the town as the examination of the events continues. The public discourse surrounding her story ignited online, with countless individuals weighing in on a case that touched the nation. It is through the continued discussion of such tragedies that difficult questions are forced into the light. The tragedy of Lily Peters is more than a chilling headline. It is a permanent scar on the heart of a community and a stark wake-up call for us all. It shatters the comforting illusion that danger only exists in the dark corners of big cities. or in the faces of strangers. The most haunting lesson from Chippewa Falls is that evil can wear the mask of absolute normality, hiding behind a familiar smile or even a shared last name. We must realize that vigilance is not a sign of fear, but the highest form of love. It is a reminder that we cannot afford to be blinded by the perceived safety of our small towns. We must empower our children to trust their instincts and understand that personal boundaries apply to everyone without exception. Lily's 3-minute bike ride should have been a simple slice of childhood freedom. Instead, it became an eternal silence. Let her memory be the reason we look twice, listen closer, and refuse to let complacency win. Protecting the vulnerable is a collective, unyielding promise. We must be the shield that stands between the innocent and the shadows, ensuring that no more angels are lost to the danger hiding in plain sight.